suddenly everything changed. Denise Boggs revealed the startling truth about Joni Lamb. Furthermore, it's not the day that those who follow the stars had in mind. Along with startling revelations and long-kept information, tensions that have been building for some time are finally becoming apparent. The truth was kept from people for years by allegiance, shame, and quiet. However, that is no longer true. Daystar and everyone who relied on it might be shaken by what Denise revealed when she pulled back the curtain. Marcus Lamb's words held great significance during his final days in the hospital bed. He appeared unfrightened. He was not perplexed. He had a strategy. Being a devout man who created Daystar, Marcus was aware of his limited time. The fact that he recognized what he intended to give up, however, was more significant. It wasn't about being famous, wealthy, or attractive. It was guidance. It was a present. He requested Denise Boggs. Denise was a multifaceted aide to many people. Marcus shared with her personal details about himself that no one else was aware of. He instructed Rachel, his daughter, to call Denise from his hospital room for this reason. The request was serious. It mattered. It was intentional. When the call went through, Marcus spoke directly to Denise, and his words would be heard well beyond that room. He instructed her to write down everything. Not later, that is. Holding on wasn't difficult for this man. This supervisor was ensuring that his final directives were recorded and remembered. Denise said Marcus's statements were straightforward and devoid of emotion. They were well organized, had a strategy, and followed a procedure. He did not dwell on the past. He was outlining a strategy. Marcus had more than a hazy notion. He had names and parts in mind. He informed her bluntly, "I think it's time to give Daystar to the next generation." Jonathan Lamb, his son, was to become the main boss. Jonathan wouldn't be doing it alone, but Marcus referred to him as the first Lamb who needed to assume the responsibility. "Johnny and I built Daystar so that the kids could take it on." His words, that was what it was all about. But he accomplished more than that. Marcus's children, Rebecca and Rachel, each received distinct responsibilities in the future leadership. Rebecca's husband, J.W., supported the plan as well. Joshua Brown, Rachel's husband, was not present, though. It was obvious that Joshua was not a part of Marcus's scheme because he was employed at Daystar at the time. Denise claimed that although Marcus didn't say it, she believed it was prearranged. She followed the guidelines. Denise followed Marcus's instructions, telling Joni Lamb and other significant family members that there was no uncertainty or confusion, that Marcus wasn't rambling in his final hours, and that he was providing precise instructions on how to manage the kingdom. The most crucial thing Marcus said was, "You make sure it gets where it needs to go." He wanted unity and faith to guide the change. He didn't want Daystar to become disjointed or split up over power disputes. However, what would follow would Denise witnessed the scheme Marcus had laboriously crafted begin to unravel. This is the reason it hurt so much. It was a direct message from a man who knew his time was up and wanted to be in command once more, not some covert scheme. Instead of the peaceful transition Marcus had hoped for, something very different happened. The network was operated by Joni Lamb alone. Both publicly and privately, Marcus had prayed for Jonathan to become a good leader. However, Jonathan was removed, not only dismissed, but also forced to leave due to coercion, spiritual abuse, and silence. Long before he was admitted to the hospital, Marcus Lamb was planning for the future. In addition to his family's future, he was considering the future of Daystar, the global Christian television network that he and his wife Joni founded from the ground up. Marcus's final act of love for his family, his goal, and the individuals who supported him went beyond simple instructions when he spoke to Denise. But after everything is said and done, it's difficult to avoid wondering how something so clear could have gone unnoticed. He had a mission. He had faith in something greater than himself. Marcus understood that, like many leaders who genuinely care about their work, Leaving a legacy only matters if you are prepared for it. Over the years, Marcus did more than just manage Daystar. He listened, prayed, and watched as well. He observed his children's behavior both on and off camera, during meetings, prayer, and the silent moments when no one is watching. He was prepared to make a decision when the time came, since he believed that this was about his spiritual calling and being in accordance with God's plan. In that final crucial call, Marcus made it obvious to Denise Boggs that Jonathan Lamb, his son, would be in command. Marcus felt certain that Jonathan had been called by God to complete the mission, not just because he was family. He didn't speak, softly or in fancy terms. Rather, he stated unequivocally that Jonathan is the first lamb who must take the initiative. It was a firm decision founded on years of spiritual study, not a hunch or a wishful thought. But he didn't stop there. He developed a family system of leadership to ensure that Daystar remained focused on its objectives, because he understood that managing a ministry like this requires more than one person. He pictured Susie, Jonathan's wife, working alongside him, supporting him, and helping him bear the burden of organizational and spiritual responsibilities. This new vision also included Marcus's children, Rebecca and Rachel. Their strengths were acknowledged, and their duties were clarified. J.W., Rebecca's husband, made a very wise decision by joining this innovative initiative. The ministry, but they were aware of the significance of their work. Being a god was more important to him than having power. But as Denise Boggs listened to Marcus's speech, she became aware that Joshua Brown was absent. Surprisingly, his name had been left out of the entire conversation. Joshua, who is married to Rachel, was heavily involved in Daystar's operations at the time. Since he was already a member of the family and had a prominent position in the network, it would have been reasonable to include his name, but Marcus made no mention of him. The remainder of the conversation was concise and direct, and Marcus instructed Denise to ensure that everyone heard him. "A goal is loud not because it was said, but because it wasn't," Denise later stated. Even more potent than what individuals say is what they don't say. Denise knew instantly, but she didn't want to inquire because of Marcus's tone. He advised her not to inquire or investigate more at this time. These were orders, or moving orders, not only ideas. Denise took offense at his statement that you make sure it gets where it needs to go. She shared Marcus's thoughts with Joni, Marcus's children, and Daystar's officials. The clear guidelines moving forward were to honor his desires, adhere to the plan, and let the children take the initiative. However, rather than viewing the public witnessed something quite different. Even though the meticulously prepared strategy went according to plan, Jonathan was fired rather than transferred or resigned. Susie was expelled from the group he was supposed to head after Marcus selected, prayed over, and trained a man who was later dismissed. It became even more ambiguous because what had appeared to be a seamless transition now appeared to be a complete rejection of Marcus's final request. According to many who knew Jonathan and were close to his family, he had been monitored, manipulated, and under spiritual pressure. Marcus's strategy appeared to have been altered, and his voice was nowhere to be heard. In addition to the fact that the plan failed, Denise was devastated because Marcus had been praying and acting with good intentions the entire time. He created a spiritual blueprint to safeguard the objective rather than a hierarchy to appease egos or choose favorites. Those who continued to support Marcus's idea began referring to the individuals fighting Jonathan's leadership in the background as the Daystar Mafia. This was an exhortation to establish a group founded more on secrecy and control than on familial ties. What concerns me the most is that Marcus's idea was never discussed in public by any of the network's executives, including the newly appointed Joni Lamb. No family roundtable, no public declaration, no open discussion. All that was heard was silence, which fueled further resentment, mistrust, and estrangement. For many Daystar viewers who had been watching for decades, this was more than a family issue. They gave to this ministry because they thought it was founded on faith, honesty, and the gospel, and they saw it as a test of honesty. Brown Joshua, what say you? The reason he wasn't invited remains one of the story's greatest mysteries. What? Was it that Marcus saw that nobody else saw? Was there something more important he didn't want to discuss? We're not sure, but Marcus had a plan. It was intentional. It was thoughtful. It wasn't examined either. Those same individuals were witnessing it live at this point, and it was a very spiritual event. A father's final request was silently denied for no apparent reason. Marcus Lamb left behind more than just a TV empire when he passed away. Millions of people worldwide were impacted by the vision, church, and spiritual legacy he left behind. For decades, Christian viewers had looked to Daystar for truth, healing, and hope. Marcus had been a dependable leader. During that period, a guy who was certain of his purpose and had dedicated his life to using the media to share the gospel. However, what began as a silent passing of the torch soon evolved into something more. When Daystar's wife and lifelong ministry partner Joni Lamb went public as his new face, many positive things were spoken about him. She discussed Marcus's objectives, his enthusiasm for the work, and the need of continuing as a cohesive team. Behind the scenes, a completely other scenario was unfolding, despite the fact that this might have appeared to be the next development in a faith-based narrative. According to those with knowledge of the matter, Daystar's power dynamics rapidly shifted after Marcus's passing. The obvious plan Marcus had provided Denise Boggs for the spiritual succession, designating his son Jonathan as the next leader, did not work out. Rather, things took a whole other turn. Jonathan and his wife Susie were quietly removed from leadership within a few months. There was no official statement, no public explanation, and no discussion regarding the familial change. It was silent. Those who knew Marcus well found this to be both disheartening and perplexing. In addition to hinting at Jonathan's future role, Marcus had made it his final mission to ensure that his son would continue the work, and now that son was gone, so it seemed like betrayal. Because some employees at Daystar had always appreciated Jonathan's quiet demeanor, there were miscommunications and arguments among them, strength and a modest disposition. They trusted his quiet, devout, and unobtrusive leadership style. Because Joni had been with the network from the beginning and was well known in the public eye, some people were more devoted to her. What was once a harmonious workplace became a battleground of allegiances, with individuals picking sides, rumors becoming whispers, and tension rising. Then, suddenly, a few current and former workers began referring to the group of people surrounding Joni as the Daystar Mafia. This gradual disintegration was first invisible to those outside the church because Daystar continued to broadcast its shows, roll the cameras, deliver sermons, and play music. However, a storm was building underneath that smooth exterior. What it sounded like was based on true stories. It was claimed that spiritual pressure and manipulation were being employed and that people were being watched, threatened, and controlled. Control over the entire church's future was contested. It became apparent to those who had been following the ministry for years that something was wrong. Longtime donors became uneasy, viewers began to have questions, and some stopped contributing altogether. Denise Boggs initially tried to keep quiet, but she took Marcus's final words to heart, like sacred texts. As she watched the plot unravel, however, she felt compelled to speak up since she understood Marcus's words and felt it was her responsibility. She described her most recent call to Marcus. The tale of certain individuals changed the course of events because it confirmed what many had previously assumed, that Daystar had abandoned the spiritual compass Marcus had left behind. Particularly, after Marcus's passing, Joni Lamb, the host of Johnny Table Talk, was a symbol of strength, the face of the church, and someone that everyone looked up to. It all revolved around her. Now, however, her leadership was being questioned. She was questioned about why she rejected Jonathan cast aside and Marcus's idea. Furthermore, why did the church act less like a spiritual family and more like a business? Joni took a long time to respond, but when she did, she refuted the accusations and said that the modifications were beneficial to Daystar. Because Marcus's wishes were kept a secret, the questions became louder despite her composure. However, Jonathan and Susie took a different approach. They didn't raise allegations, give interviews, or defend themselves in the press. They just vanished from the narrative and the screen instead, but their silence was more powerful than any words. Marcus had meticulously planned his future, but everything had fallen apart. What had started out as a ministry founded on prayer, humility, and purpose appeared to be mired in a struggle for influence, authority, and reputation. The foundation of Daystar, Marcus's spiritual legacy, was disintegrating behind a curtain of power politics. The terrible thing is that this dispute went beyond a simple family dispute and involved religion and the discrepancy between what was said and what was actually done. And it made many friends and spectators feel something. Not just a church is involved in the Daystar affair. Any service that becomes too large too quickly and loses sight of its origins is. Still watching are those who once genuinely believed in what Daystar stood for. The question is not what went wrong, but if it can be fixed. Despite all the headlines, leaked calls, and Denise Boggs' passionate speech, the legacy is still up, for grabs, and the power battle continues. This is about trust, honesty, and whether or not religious people are being told the truth. It's not simply about a ministry. What prevented Marcus Lamb's final wishes from being fulfilled? The question that keeps coming up is this one. Several observers agreed with him when he made it apparent. Even those who have been Daystar fans for years and once firmly believed in its mission still have unanswered doubts. These questions have not disappeared. Rather, they have simply grown. Louder, more significant, and more serious. It had an aim and a clear structure. It was neither emotional nor ambiguous. How, therefore, can one forget something so significant? Some have attempted to justify it by claiming that Joni knew better, that Marcus wasn't thinking clearly, or that he was ill. But Denise vehemently disagreed, stating that Marcus was observant, methodical, and intensely focused. A very thorough and well-considered strategy for Daystar's future was laid out in the hospital bed. Rachel, Rebecca, Jonathan Lamb, and their husbands would be in command. However, one name was conspicuously absent. The question of what actually transpired between Jonathan and Susie comes next. There was never a complete explanation for their termination, and nobody knew why. We just know that they have been silently taken away. There is silence and neither interview nor speech. Some claim they were compelled to leave, while others claim they did so voluntarily. It was a father's final task, not a digression.